The Weather Lounge podcast is brought to you by CrewTracker Software.
This is the Weather Lounge here at WeatherWorks.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us here on the Weather Lounge. I'm your host, meteorologist Mike Mahalik, and this podcast comes to you from our WeatherWorks headquarters located in Hackettstown, New Jersey. I don't have my co-host here with me today, Brad Miller. He's, I think, golfing today or something like that. So, I guess that was a little bit more important than recording a podcast with me. But anyway, today's topic is a really great one. It's about how weather affects the military. And I'm pretty excited as I'm joined with an old friend of mine from back in high school, Lieutenant Colonel now, Brian Jenson, in the U.S. Army. Weather impacts his operations on a daily basis and more than you would expect from the conversations I've had before this recording. And so enough about me. I'm just the host here. Let's bring in Brian. Lieutenant Colonel Brian Jenson, man, good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too, Mike. Been a long time since we're battling it out on the football fields.
I know. I even remember that first day. I think you came into practice, and Brian and I went to high school together. Back in Nazareth, Pennsylvania, and I remember him coming in, and there's all this talk about this kid's coming from California, and we were all like, "What? California? Like, what's going on?" Like, this is just, all the kids on the team I grew up playing, pee-wee football with, or whatever. And then you came from California, and everybody was like, "What? What's going on here?"
Yeah, it was just much of a culture shock for me from the beaches of San Diego to the cornfields of Nazareth.
But it's again, it's good to talk to you again. And but hey, why don't you give us a little bit about your background before we get into the real weather impacts on what you do in the military, just to give our listeners a little sense of your experience.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. So obviously graduated high school with you from Nazareth, went off to West Point, went to the United States Military Academy, played football for Army for a few years, relived those Al Bundy glory days, if you will. Then got commissioned in 2005, got commissioned as a field artillery officer. So I went off to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, did about 6-8 months there of training on how to be an artillery officer, and then got stationed out in Schweinfurt, Germany. So I was actually in Germany for about 8 years, intermixed with kind of year on, year off, where I showed up. Immediately I deployed to Ramadi, Iraq. So I was there for the Battle of Ramadi in 2006 into 2007. So I was there for about 15 months in Iraq, came back, literally was on the ground in Germany for about a year to the day, and redeployed again back to Iraq, this time into Bakuba. So I was outside of Bakuba in a place called South Baladruz, and pretty much fought from there, pretty much all the way to the Iran border, and was doing clearance ops out there for about a year, for about 12 months. Came back, stayed in Germany, did what's called our Captain's Career Course, kind of advanced training. Went back to Afghanistan as a battery commander, so I was commanding a couple hundred troops out in East Paktika, Afghanistan, so right on the Pakistan border, only about a mile or two off of the border, way up in the mountains up there. Did 12 months in Afghanistan there. Let's see, came back, moved to England, lived in Cambridge, England for about 2.5, 3 years, where I was what they call a ground liaison officer. So I was working with the 48th Fighter Wing as a ground liaison officer. So essentially I was the liaison between the F-15 fighter jets up in the sky and all of our ground elements that were down on the ground. So that was when ISIS was kicking off and some other stuff. So went around the world a little bit, around the Balkans, Romania, Bulgaria, some other spots with those folks. Came back for our General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. So I got to experience Kansas City and Kansas City barbecue for a little bit.
That probably was pretty good.
Yeah. Put on a few pounds at the barbecue.
I'm sure I probably would do the same if I was out there with all that barbecue.
Yeah, and then moved to Savannah, Georgia, to Fort Stewart, Georgia, with 3rd Infantry Division. Went back to Afghanistan again, did another about 9 months over there, with actually our aviation unit, our aviation brigade. So with our Blackhawks, Apache, Chinooks, all that type of stuff, supporting them and some of our special force ops and stuff over there. But finished out my time at Fort Stewart, did another couple years there as an executive officer, kind of like a battalion commander, kind of an apprentice, if you will. Not a fun job, but you learn quite a bit, kind of in that apprentice role, chief operations, etc. And then I've been out in Las Vegas now for about 2 years. In June as the instructor for the Joint Firepower course, what we call a bunch of other courses. There's actually there's what's called WIC. It's like the weapon instructor course. It's kind of like it's actually like the Top Gun for the Air Force. So speaking of Top Gun coming out, yeah. So I essentially help teach in a few of those courses as well too.
Wow, I mean, especially with that, it's interesting when you start talking about F-15s and stuff like that. I know, you know, the Top Gun movie came out over the this year, and everybody was pumped up about that. I had a good time watching that again. I did watch the first movie before the second one came out, and then I saw that you were dealing with F-15s. Now I know they were doing F-14s and F-18s and stuff like that in the movie, but I saw that and I was like, wow, that's awesome that you have that type of experience too. Not exactly flying, but at least dealing with what has to go into that.
Yeah, it's fun. I get to work with the A-10s, the F-15, F-16s, a little bit with the F-35s. Um, but actually, it's funny watching Top Gun. Everybody knows Maverick, Goose, Iceman. Everyone's got their call signs. So I guess I got one of the privileges is that while I was in England, I got actually my official call sign through the Air Force. Went through the whole naming process, convention, and all that. The fun games that go along with it. So I do have a call sign of Van Dam. So I do go by Van Dam within.
Ah, nice.
Yeah.
No, it's not Viper, but
No.
or but Van Damme is pretty cool. I'd be
Yeah.
pretty happy with that one. It's not like you had some silly call sign, that
Flounder
would
or
be
something. Yeah.
yeah, something terrible. But no, I mean that's awesome. But the real reason we brought you on was to talk more about how the weather impacts so many things when it comes to the military. And I mean, I know there are a lot of things you guys have to consider. I mean, even when I was at Penn State, going for my meteorology degree, I even thought about joining the Air Force and taking the officer's exam to go in there as a meteorologist, to help out in that regard. But you know, for some reason, things just didn't go the way I thought it was going to go. I mean, I went, I had a date to take the officer's exam. I got there, and my name wasn't on the list for some crazy reason. It wasn't there, and I don't know. And after that, I just was kind of like, I don't know, is that really what I want to do? And just kind of, it's funny how things like that happen. But
Yeah. Led to where you're at today.
what's that?
That led to where you're at today, though. So we're good to go.
Yeah, hey, so I'm having a good time here at WeatherWorks, and we provide weather forecasts for NFL teams and stadiums and road departments and things of that nature, and we give consultation in that regard for people. So that's a little bit about our company and what we do. But so again, let's get back over to the role of weather and how it affects the military stuff. So, I mean, meteorologists themselves, I mean, in the Army, do you have people in these roles as like officers or something like that that are you guys consult on a daily or what?
Yeah, so kind of yes and no with that. So yes, we do. There are some weather folks in the Army, but really we rely on the Air Force for that. So we integrate with them quite a bit. So we have what's called a SWO, a Staff Weather Officer, that is actually a uniformed Air Force officer that will get attached to us. And so we have them at pretty much all echelons from like the brigade levels, division levels, so kind of our upper echelons and all that. But those are those senior staff weather officers that essentially are like the meteorologists. They are those trained weather officers. Once you get down kind of to the lower command echelon, like kind of more tactical, like troops on the ground level, we have our intel officers that are trained not necessarily on how to read the weather, get all that, but they get the weather reports from the SWOs and then can brief that and kind of break that down on the effects on our military operations and across the board for us.
Oh, okay. So I see. So, yeah, I mean, and the Air Force is kind of affiliated with the Army, correct?
Right, right, yeah, and especially when you're looking at like our ground troops and all that is we have what's called an ALO, an air liaison officer, and they come with a tactical air party of a bunch of people, a bunch of their air controllers and stuff like that, or they control like the airstrikes and stuff. So they come and kind of get dispersed and attached to us from the ground up. So yeah, we are pretty well integrated, train with them, deploy with them, etc.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when I was thinking about this topic too, I mean, I've seen so many programs about, D-Day and the weather on D-Day and stuff like that, and how important it was for those, weather officers, to have that forecast correct for that day, and I just thought like, there's probably more that goes into it than what anybody would think as a civilian on all of your operations from you know what kind of infantry stuff is going on, what you're taking on you with you or what you're wearing, all the way to how it's going to affect something you are, shooting, you know, eh, 18 to 20 miles away or trying to hit. So, um, but I think maybe if we start a little bit, what would be your specialty? Your specialty is artillery, basically.
So artillery and like as a fire supporter and all that, yeah. So basically all things artillery, from how to call in the artillery to how to do the calculations to yep, how to actually fire the cannons.
Right. So take us through that a little bit. I mean, since that's your, strong part, um, I mean, what are you dealing with when you're trying to hit a target that's 20 miles away with one of your artillery pieces? Like, what goes into that? I know, like, the list is probably going on forever, and we can like do a whole encyclopedia on how this is done, but maybe give us a general idea.
Yeah, so really, you kind of have three different portions to it, and kind of the middle portion is where weather's going to have the most large, probably the largest effect for us as far as who's really dealing with it. Is so at first you kind of have your fire supporter, your person that's actually calling the artillery strike in, that's going, hey, I see the target. I'm going to do what we call a call for fire. So they're doing the radio transmission saying, hey, basically, I need artillery rounds or these types of rounds, etc., to hit and impact at this location because I've got this target in front of me, a bunch of enemy tanks, whatever it is. Then you have kind of the middlemen, which is our fire direction center. Those are the guys that are back there. They're doing all the computations, and they're the ones that are computing what angle to put the tube at, what direction to point the tube in, how much powder to put behind it, all that type of stuff. And then that comes out with like a message that then gets sent down to the gun line, and then we have our gun bunnies down there, which are the guys that are actually then loading the cannon, put the powder behind it, ripping the lanyard, you know what I mean, and sending that round down range, if you will. Um, so while the forward observers will take weather into account a little bit when they're trying to figure out what wind direction is on the ground, if we're going to put out some smoke and that type of stuff, they deal with it a little bit. But those fire direction folks, the fire direction center in the middle piece, they are dealing with it. That is like one of the biggest key things is we call it MET data or meteorological data. And so when we're looking at how accurately we're firing, one of the first things we look at is if we're missing the target, is what's the MET data? When did we last update our MET? So we have, when you go through that training, you have to do it. We learn how to do it first manually. So we literally learn how to calculate how much powder, what the angle of the tube is going to be, all that type of stuff. We do it with slide rules and books and tables and calculators and hand jam all of that. And they actually they give us these meteorological data sheets that would be like printouts or whatever, and that factors in, yes, the wind speed, the density, precipitation, wind direction, like all that type of stuff, and it's broken down literally from the ground all the way up to 30-40,000 feet above ground level. So we're taking it and figuring out the MET at every different echelon, from 0 feet all the way up to the top and back down again.
Yeah, that kind of runs a parallel almost with meteorology when you're talking about uh, writing everything out by hand and figuring out by hand first. So, because we actually do the same thing as meteorologists when we're going through college and getting our degree, because we go through all of the calculus, all the physics, all the atmospheric chemistry and whatever, to figure out how the atmosphere works and all the fluid dynamics and everything else. Now, do I use that on an everyday basis? No. That's why we have those computer simulations, computer models out there. They run all those, crazy formulas for us to tell us, where the storms are most likely to go. So I understand that parallel there where you're really learning how to make these calculations, but that, you know might be aided in down the road, but that you really have an understanding on how it works.
Yeah, and it's crazy how far we come, because even just in I've been in for what 20 22 years now or whatever. When I first came in as artillery officer, we used to have a meteorological section within the army, and they would literally they had these giant, I don't know, 4 foot 5 foot balloons with a little like weather box thing on about a 6 feet piece of rope, and they'd run out to the middle of the field and then fly these things up from our operation centers, and that's what would digitally send out all that data for us. Since then, probably within the last, like say, 10 years or so, we've got new systems that come out, new technology. So those balloons have kind of gone away, if you will, and we just have basic sensors we can, we set out, or the Air Force sends out, that pulls that weather data for us. Um, but probably like you said, we had to learn it how to do it by hand first, of all the calculations and how you add in the wind speed, wind direction, and how the effects of that round, or the effects it's going to have on that artillery round. Now we have, we use what's called a FATAD, the Advanced Field Artillery Tactical Data System, which is basically our computer that spits out all of that information for us on how much powder to use, what angle to put the gun at, etc. Uh, but that metadata now, it's all digital, so we can actually get it. So it's literally, almost think of it kind of like emailed to us from system to system, comes down to the thing. You just kind of hit update, and our computers update all that data for us pretty much within a minute or so. But
Wow. So it's all about speed then, I mean, it's which is way more efficient than trying to get your slide rule out and figuring which way we got to aim this thing.
exactly. And I'm sure it's probably the same with you guys too. Like if you know how to do it by hand, you knew all the stuff behind it. If every now and then, say there is a technological glitch, you can look at something and go, wait a second, that doesn't sound right. Like, let me look at what possibly could have that effect, or what could be going on. And so,
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those situations come up where, we're in a almost like a pattern recognition mode, because you look at these models over and over and over again, and then you eventually recognize a situation that looks similar to a prior weather event, so that you can kind of use your experience to make those forecasts a bit more accurate, and then just looking at surface maps and things like that, where there's lift in the atmosphere, where clouds will develop, um, where your precipitation is going to develop, and that it's just there's a lot that goes into it for sure. But I mean, yeah, I mean, on your end, I mean, that's really great that it's come that far, that you can now be like, I got it, here's where we're going in a matter of seconds probably.
yeah. And so even that, like we get a brief every morning, like in combat and all that, where our SWO, the weather officer, will brief, hey, the next 3 to 5 day weather forecast, that, and then goes really in depth onto that specific day, or that, the next 24 hours. And so we'll look at it, and based off of the weather effects and a lot of other indicators like that, enemy stuff, will dictate how often we update that meteorological data in our AFATAD systems and all that. Because sometimes if you're kind of going, okay, weather's really not going to change at all for the next day or so, it's going to be really standstill, we might not update it every 4 to 6 hours or something. But hey, we've got storms, winds, a front moving in, something like that. Hey, we're updating it every hour, every 30 minutes or something, just kind of depending on the situation and everything. So yeah, all that goes in, because when you're looking at it, we're shooting one round of our 155 millimeter howitzer, well, like a paladin or something. One round, 100 pounds. We're slinging that thing 20, 30 kilometers through the air, and up at anywhere from 20 to 40,000 feet or higher potentially. Um, so when we're looking at that, we don't work off of degrees, so we work off of mils. So instead of 360 degrees in the circle, we use 6,400 mils, just to make it that much more accurate. So just to show the difference in that is, yeah, like 1 difference of 1 mil at like 10 kilometers is about 100 meters. So if you're looking at how precise we have to be in our calculations, I mean, one of those rounds landing 100 meters off target, that, and especially if we're shooting in close proximity of troops, that could be the difference between killing the enemy or killing a friendly. So that is how precise we have to go with. So you can imagine just the effects that that weather is having on that round as it's going through the air, whether it's a tailwind, headwind, side wind, air density, precipitation, all that type of stuff comes into the effects on that round. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about, well, sure, the winds at the surface could be, 5 or 10 miles an hour, but then if you go higher up at 30,000 feet, you could be having 100 knot winds up there, or even more. So it's amazing to me that you guys are able to calculate all those levels and be able to be that accurate on your target. I mean, is there like a range of accuracy you're looking for, or are you like pinpointing this thing, or like what's the goal when you're firing at something?
So yeah, we're trying to go pinpoint and get as close as we can off of it. Now we know, we call it accurate predicted fire, because our when you're slinging that heavy of a round, and when I say they're dummy rounds, there's no GPS on it, there's no satellite stuff on it. It's just a standard round that, hey, we're when we rip that lanyard, it's going to go where it goes. So we obviously take that really serious when we're going over calculations. So when we're doing everything, we have tolerances of what we're doing, but it's all within plus or minus 1 mil, one degree, if you will, or yeah, of all those type of things. So the tolerances we have are very, very small. But for like a 155 millimeter round, the effective radius, the blast radius is about 50 meters. So we're trying to get it at least within 50 meters of that target. But there's a lot of things again that go back into it, of the accurate target location, as well as obviously the weather effects and the gun location, and all that type of stuff. So
So talking about, launching this thing, I mean, if you have cloud cover or rain or something like that, can you still do this operation, or does that kind of shut things down?
no, so it is. So that's like one of the things is just like any, whether it's football, sports, is that everybody kind of jibs and jabs and everybody wants to talk about how they're better than the other team or whatever. So we have even that friendly competition within the Army or within the services in general. So one of the things that'll be funny is that we'll talk with like our rotary pilots, like the Apache pilots, and they'll tell how awesome they are, and they got their Hellfire missiles, and they can strike targets and precision and do all this type of stuff. So we jib and jab back, and one of the things we always get them on is like, yeah, well, we are an all-weather, we're the only all-weather delivery system. So it doesn't matter rain, sleet, snow, winds, we can fire and put artillery rounds out there. Where bad weather, those aircraft are going to get grounded. So we we can kill anytime that we want. You guys have the weather has to be perfect for you guys.
Well, there you go. So you guys are more versatile. So like, you win the argument, hands down, all the time.
Thank you. Yeah, my counterpart Dan, when he hears this, he's gonna laugh. He's an Apache pilot.
I knew he was gonna say that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Come on, man.
He's not here to defend himself, but it's okay.
Since 2004, CrewTracker Software has enabled snow and ice management companies to save time, money, and resources with their comprehensive digital services platform. All the information needed to plan your operations and make business decisions is current and always available. Along with QuickBooks, CrewTracker Software provides seamless integration with WeatherWorks certified snowfall totals. Visit CrewTracker.com to rock your game and learn how CrewTracker Software makes managing snow and ice simple. Take advantage of the SIMA Show Special $500 discount and White Glove Startup Service offer.
We talked a little bit about the artillery and how that works. That's one of your specialties. But it sounds like you had a lot of experience in, the infantry and just being, not to minimize that in any way. I mean,
So yeah, because a lot of my time actually has been not so much on the gun line portion of it, but as a fire supporter, the guys that are calling in the call for fire and calling in the targets and all that, that's where the majority of my time has been. And yeah, we get fully embedded with the infantry, with the tankers, etc. So we are their supporters out there with them, rolling with them, etc. So yeah, getting to see those full effects as well too.
so as a soldier on the ground, boots on the ground, w- what kind of things are you guys thinking about, as far as, is it just coming down to what you're wearing with the uniform, or does it come down to, okay, how much water you're carrying, how much food you're carrying, etc.?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, we calculate all that stuff in, and we'll figure out, yeah, based off of the weather, the heat, that type of stuff. We have different heat categories, if you will, 1 through 5, and so we'll kind of understand based off of the different heat categories how much water we have to pack, food, that type of stuff. The uniforms have changed. When I first came in, we had the old like woodland camouflage. We had winter and summer uniforms then. Uniforms have changed a few times since then. So really now we have one standard uniform. So as far as the heat goes, we really don't have a summer uniform. It's just a standard uniform. We do have these like combat shirts, that are vests, if we will. Think of it kind of like an Under Armour shirt that actually has like a thicker material on the sleeves, but like the chest and everything is kind of like a moisture wicking. So we wear that under our body armor, so it's a little bit lighter when we're out in the desert and that sort of stuff. So you're not sweating quite as much, or at least you're not quite as hot underneath your kit and 70 pounds of gear and everything.
Wow, 70 pounds?
Yeah, so somewhere depending upon what you have, you'll have anywhere from say light side 50, heavy side like 100, 110 pounds, if you will, when you pack out. But so obviously the weather affects all that type of stuff. Obviously, when we're looking at rain, what type of wet weather gear, cold weather gear, if we're going up, like in Afghanistan, yeah, we were up there, and I think some of the days we were -10, -12 degrees up there in the mountains. We were up at like 7, 8,000 feet. So um, obviously, you're looking at cold weather gear and how long you can be out, and frostbite and all that type of stuff as well too.
So I mean, they all sound like, well, I mean, obviously the extremes are the worst. You don't want it to be too hot, you don't want it to be too cold. But if you had to choose, you're out there, you got to run a mission. What are you doing? You going cold? Or you going hot?
Oof, man, I don't know, maybe hot. I guess yeah, they both are not fun. Yeah.
Like I'm just envisioning, like, okay, I got 100 pounds of gear on, and it's 100 degrees outside in the desert, and I don't even know.
That is not fun. Yeah, the Iraq heat like that was not fun. Afghanistan up in the mountains when it was cold was not exactly fun either. Because then you're just yeah, you just got all this like what you're trying to minimize as much gear like we call it snivel gear, but like jackets and stuff. You're trying to minimize as much as you can because otherwise you're waddling around. You can't move because you're it's kind of that.
Just so bulky, and even with whatever gloves you wear, getting to your your rifle or whatever must be difficult to do. If you got some thick glove on, how you gonna?
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of one of those like, yeah, which is the lesser evil? I don't know. I'd say maybe heat, but at the same time, 'cause I'm just dumping water on me, chugging water at
Yeah.
the same time. That is also ultra miserable as well too sometimes. So.
So the heat out there in Iraq, I mean, is it more of like a dry Arizona heat? Or are we talking about something that's more humid?
Yeah, no, no, no. For the most part, most of Iraq is going to be really dry heat and all that. When I was in Ramadi, we had a little bit more humidity right there because the Euphrates River cuts the city in half. So we did get a little bit more humidity off of the river and stuff. But for the most part, yeah, it's all desert dry heat.
You know, I saw a little bit from your notes that there could be issues sometimes with some of the tech you use, and what the temperatures are, and especially when it comes to sunset, sunrise, and things like that, when you're using you know night vision tech or whatever it may be. So what's going on there that's just kind of interfering with things?
Yeah, so when we're looking at, we've got some new technology, some new night vision goggles, some new thermals and stuff out there that have kind of minimized this. But for a long time, and still to an extent, we get what's called thermal crossover, which will happen first thing in the morning and then again at night. And what a lot of that technology relies on is the difference between heat of targets or anything in the atmosphere. So when you're looking out between body heat, animals, plants, trees, shrub, all that type of stuff, they're looking at the differences in heat to kind of help lay everything out so you can see through that night vision. So when you get to that point, there's a point where you have a crossover in the morning and in the evening, where essentially all of the temperatures almost get mixed up. There's not a large enough uh, division, if you will, or separation in those temperatures, so everything kind of gets like greened or blacked out, if you will. It's again, we've gotten our technology a little bit better, so it's not quite as much of an issue anymore, but it's still definitely there as a consideration to know that hey, they might be degraded, and it might not. They're still going to work, but they're not going to be at 100%, perfect capacity and all that. So again, so kind of back to that SWO, that weather officer or the intel officer, when they're briefing the weather effects, they will brief that's something briefed every day. What time thermal crossover is in the morning, and what time to expect thermal crossover in the evening. So just so whether it's troops on the ground, they understand when that's going on. Again, our pilots, they know when thermal crossover is going to happen because they're flying and they're flying through night vision and stuff like that as well too. So
Yeah, I mean, I never would have thought of that, to have that as a forecast parameter. But I guess it's kind of it goes with everything with what you're doing and what your needs are. Kind of like our clients at WeatherWorks. The guy who is keeping the field nice for an NFL football game is going to have different things he needs to look at than some guy who's out, paving a roadway. So everybody uses the weather information in different ways, and I think that's what's really important here. Is just, you know, that's what I kind of wanted to point out is that so many different people use weather in so many different ways, and just bringing that to light for a lot of people out there, I think is important.
absolutely. 'Cause
That it's
so yeah,
Yeah,
even like within our own forces and all that, from like unit to unit, I can go to one of our infantry units, one of our like light units, where that's all they are. Is they're guys that have the rucksack on their back, they got their boots on their feet, and their M4 in their hands. So when it comes to say like precipitation and rain, they kind of care about it a little bit, but it's kind of like the old hey, if it ain't raining, we ain't training. They're just kind of like whatever. So we're walking through mud, whatever. But say you take that and switch it over to like one of our tank or Bradley, our mechanized units, armored unit. Depending upon that amount of precipitation, tanks, Bradley sometimes don't do all that good, and like they'll make it through mud fine. But if it gets too much, hey, it's been swampy, terrain out there, they're going to look at that a lot differently than say a light infantry unit would, or vice versa. So there's things that'll affect one versus the other. So even that, our weather officers, our intel officers, kind of to your point, with WeatherWorks, you guys have to change those parameters based off your client. They do the same thing, kind of based off the client or unit that they're supporting in the army as well too.
yeah. I mean, and we have a lot of one of our biggest strengths at WeatherWorks is consultation. Like people call in, they need some information, and we take that weather and we give them like, well, hey, it's going to be awful cold for your paving activities tonight, or there's going to be too much, too much rain for you guys to be laying down asphalt. So that's what people are asking, and it changes based on their needs, and it's not you know, I think when people think of weather, a lot of times they think of the guy on the news just giving the 5-day forecast and what's going on today tonight. Whereas weather forecasts can be used for so much more, and it's so much in to even saving a lot of our clients time. If they're waiting for a snowflake to fall out there and they're out there 3 hours earlier than it's actually going to fall, they're wasting all kinds of time. But if we could tell them, hey, this is when it's going to happen, this is when you need to mobilize and get out there, um, that's just a whole cost savings on their end. But so we talked a little about the foot soldiers. How about you have some experience in aircraft too? And anyway, did you see the new Top Gun movie? I
I
mean,
did. I saw that last Friday. Yeah, went and saw it.
was it good or what?
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I honestly, I want to watch it again. It was actually like really good. There's a lot like anything. I think you watch a movie as having been in the military. I'm watching it going, that wouldn't happen. That's not how that is. And then you can tell, yeah, there's parts. There's definitely. I think I don't want to do the spoiler, but there is a part in the movie where you can see where it just goes completely Hollywood off track and go like what. But
Yeah, no, that's not a thing, right? I was just wondering, are you able to sit there and are you able to enjoy the movie, or are you constantly just going like, "Oh, come on, no, that's not how it goes."
no, for that type of movie, I kind of break it down. So that type of like Top Gun or some of the other military movies, I know they're going to be a little over the top of stuff. But when I go in there with a mental mindset of like, hey, this is a Hollywood movie, I can go and enjoy it. When Hollywood tries to portray a movie as like this is exactly the true story of how this went down, I'm like, that's where I get disappointed sometimes. Like that would never happen. That's not how it is. Like that's them screwing up and like putting false info out. But I will say in the new Top Gun, a lot of the stuff like the brevity codes that they're using on the radios, the way they're talking on the radios, a lot of time are all actually like 100% legit. Like it was like, that sounds like conversations we actually have on the radio.
Yeah, I know they were trying to do their best to really capture that more, and I think from what I've heard that they were trying to get, they shot a lot of those aircraft scenes actually in the
Yeah,
cockpit.
pulling real keys and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and they were just because they want it to be as realistic as possible and no, fake like, God, I'm fighting this, but it's actually he is because, there's a Navy pilot in the front that's actually, flying that jet.
Yeah, no, they did an awesome job with that. I really enjoyed the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I did too, and I'm just I just think of like when weather movies come out too. I have the same sort of you know things that you go through. When a movie like Twister came out in the '90s, I'm like, "Yeah, come on now, that's not how it goes, or the day after tomorrow or something like that. It's like, no, that couldn't even happen. It's not even, but it's entertainment, like you said, but. Back to real life though, when you were that liaison officer, for the F-15s, so how does the weather play there? I mean, obviously, you can't do certain things based on, what the weather officer is telling you, correct?
Yeah, so they're based off our aircraft, whether it's like rotary wing like Apaches, your various fixed wing fighter jets, and even like our ISR, like our the unmanned UAVs, the drones, if you will. They all have different parameters based off the aircraft, based off of the type and all that, on whether they can take off, what they can also land in, because sometimes that also is an effect too that people don't consider is not just what's the weather right now, but what's the weather going to be like in an hour, 2, 3 hours down the road when those aircraft are checking off, because it might be favorable weather conditions right now, but hey, we've got a major front coming in. So are these either rotary wing or the helicopters or the drones? Are they even going to be able to land in a few hours? Because sometimes that might have an effect on hey, we don't want to take the risk to put them up because there's a chance with this weather front coming in, they might not have the ability to land because of high winds or crosswinds or that sort of stuff. Um, with the fighter jets, they can fly through a lot more, tenacious weather, if you will. Same as like any other aircraft, you know what I mean? Even think like a standard, 747 or something like that. Weather could still be bad, but they can still take off and land in rain or snow and that type of stuff. But it's still stuff they have to consider and look into. Um, some of the stuff that it affects a lot more though are the sensors and some of the systems that we have on the various aircraft as well too though. So like with the drones, for example, we have what's called FMV or full motion video. So that's what you kind of see on video games, you see in the movies where it's just like that camera that's, that soda straw camera that's looking down at the ground, to get the imagery and everything. Um, so that full motion video does not work through clouds. They have to be below the cloud deck in order to see the ground and all that stuff. So that's like an obvious weather effect that we have. What's the cloud ceiling at? Because if it's too low, we run risks of those things either getting shot down or spotted or whatever. So that's an effect. Certain weapon systems, even that we have off of some of our aircraft. So for like the A-10s, they have a 30 millimeter Gatling gun out of the nose of it. So those shoots are like a depleted uranium round. So those rounds, though, coming out of that Gatling gun, they're not GPS guided. It's just like firing a rifle. It's like firing a machine gun out of it. So they have again. So if they can't see the target, they have to get down below that cloud deck as well too to enable to engage those guns. Um, other things, even talking about clouds. So even you're talking about like the F-15s, F-16s, that sort of stuff. So we might have the GPS guided munitions are pretty much simple enough. Put in the GPS grids, the codes, that type of stuff. It's going to go to wherever that GPS grid is. But we have what we call LGBs or laser guided bombs. So a lot of times you hear it like in the movies, hey, they're painting the target. They got a laser. Someone's got to get in there and paint the target with this laser. So doing that type of stuff, there's a certain amount of time that those munitions need in order to lock onto that laser designator and then find its way to that target. So again, back to that cloud deck and that type of stuff, it has to get below those clouds in enable to allow it to enable to lock onto that laser. So we have to look at that too to make sure it's going to have enough time to lock on and actually track onto that target versus just being a dud and being a giant lawn dart.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it sounds like obviously a lot more weather impacts going into the aircraft missions than anything else. Like again, obviously your artillery can still work though,
Yeah.
but
Artillery.
um, but yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I always wondered too. I mean, I always wondered how obviously things can hydroplane, things like that. Same problem here with the jets and things. I I took off in rain one time out of Pittsburgh, and I was just like, Is this cool, man? I mean, how are we accomplishing this and not like sliding off the runway in one way or another?"
Yeah, yeah. So no, like I haven't really seen any issue with that. I think it's the same as kind of like the civilian aircraft. They're coming in like they're heavy enough, et cetera. Once they get through that rain, they'll touch down that railroad connect. They might need a little bit extra time to slow down, if you will. But yeah, I really yeah. There's I'm sure there is some sort of stuff there. There's some threshold, if you will, of the amount of rain. But generally speaking, I've seen them take off in all different type of conditions with that.
Snow and ice just a no go then.
Yeah, and again, it really just depends upon the aircraft and how much, and where you'll kind of see a larger effect for that. Obviously, on the rotary wing, like the helicopters, that sort of stuff. But then also on our drones, on those UAVs, because along with them, they also have issues with because they're flying up there too at 20, 30, 40,000 feet for some of them, et cetera, is they get up there and have issues with icing. So some have icing problems too, where they'll start getting ice onto the wings of those drones. And some of the drones, yeah, if too much icing can cause issues with it becoming too heavy and it's going to take it down. Some do have de-icing capabilities like planes do, et cetera. But that's also, again, something that's going to take, we have to take into consideration and look at what type of drones do we have. Do they have de-icing capabilities? What are the temps up there? That sort of stuff too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I was going to ask that question, but you already kind of got there with the drones, and if there was any difference between, the larger aircraft to the drones. I mean, is one more capable than another to be, you know, going through adverse conditions?
Yeah, yeah. The fixed wing, like our fighter jets and regular planes, all that, are definitely a lot more capable than the drones are. So, just because, again, talk about the size of them and capability with that of a crosswinds. The crosswinds are going to have a lot larger effect on a smaller drone than they are going to have on an F-15 coming into land or something like that. Um, so yeah, winds, temperature, that type of stuff will have a little bit more effect on the drones than they would on our larger aircraft.
So you talked a lot about the F-15 and stuff like that, but um, now you were the ground officer, but you ever get a chance to get in one, or is that just like a no? You can't do that.
No, no. Unfortunately, yeah, I was supposed to a few different times, and each time it just didn't get a chance for it to work out to go up as the backseater. So yeah, hopefully, fingers crossed. One of these days, hopefully, I guess still get to go back up and get in the back of one of them. So
I just thought it'd be interesting to see what it's really feels like. I mean, I know, there's been, a couple of people in media or whatever that's gone up in, a fighter jet, and they're pulling real G's, and then they, do the whole pass out thing because they can't handle it. Um, but I was trying to get a little more firsthand experience, and I was curious if you had any.
no,
But
I wish I did, man. I wish I did, brother. But
I mean, it looks like a blast. I mean, myself, I just feel like pulling some of those maneuvers, I probably wouldn't hold my lunch down,
no, not
if you
so.
know what I'm saying.
I go up on an empty stomach.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how. I mean, if I hit some turbulence in a regular passenger airplane, I'm kind of like, this isn't great.
Yeah, yeah, no, I just know that and working with them and debriefing. I've seen them when they're coming out of some of their missions like that and stuff too. And yeah, they're just literally drenched in sweat and all that. It's like, man, that was a workout of them pulling all those G's and just trying to, yeah,
Right.
hang tight up
Right.
there. So
Yeah, that's why I have to commend a lot of those the hurricane hunters that go into those hurricanes, and they're flying straight into the eye of the storm with 100 and 50-mile-an-hour winds or whatever it may be, and I'm just like, we're trying to fly around a thunderstorm, in a regular passenger 747, and I'm just like, oh man, this is rough, like. And these guys are just like, all right, I'm just going right through it. And I've seen videos where guys were, if they weren't strapped in, they would be on the ceiling basically. You could see like if their straps are a little loose, they kept rising up out of their seat and down and up and down. And I'm going, man, yeah, I'd really like to do that for that experience. But then at the same time, I'm like, ah.
there's still that. I want to know 100% certainty. I'm making it through this, and I'm going to be okay.
Yeah, 100%, man. But so I mean, I think we covered a lot of the topics, but I'm wondering if there is something that the weather impacts from your experience that maybe might be a bit surprising that you don't even really think about, or that you know the normal person wouldn't really consider? Is there anything like that out there?
I'm just trying to think right now. For the most part, I think most stuff I kind of hit already, because we do look at it at the effects and kind of tying it all back together, like our SWO or intel officers, they do brief a slide every day. And down the left hand side, because on the top it'll kind of have the daily forecast, highs, lows, winds, you know what I mean, all that type of stuff, sunrise, sunset. And then down the left hand side, you'll have all these different categories, from our troops on the ground to our vehicles to our night vision goggles to the ISR, fixed wing, rotary wing, and have list all that type of stuff down the side. Um, and then I'll have by day and by hour, essentially, like what those effects are. Are they going to be green, amber, red? Are they going to be no goes? Are they going to have any negative or adverse effects? So we hit most of kind of all that type of stuff. Um, I'm trying to think. A lot of the stuff I kind of hit already with the thermal crossover. Um, Really, it's taking it and looking at when to kind of, if we have an operation coming up and it's not tied to a specific time, certain timeline. Um, Looking at the weather effects and kind of tying it back into yesterday on the anniversary of D-Day and all that too, of going like, okay, hey, whether we do take a huge consideration into it, if we have some sort of operation just like D-Day and you're looking at it going like, okay, we need to make this happen. Well, weather's not favorable right now. Well, let's postpone it. Let's roll it to 24 hours or 48 hours, whatever it's going to be. So some of that stuff does happen quite often, actually. Um, but then on the other hand, in the Army, like I said, we say, if it ain't raining, we ain't training. So there's many
Gotcha.
times, yeah, I've slept in many a mud hole and stuff like that too, where it's like, oh, it's raining, and
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not going to be a walk in the park every time, you
yeah,
know. You got to get that experience in those horrible conditions so that, you're ready for the next time, you
yeah, you
know.
just don't ever be that guy that says, oh, it could be worse, because
Oh, no, no.
yeah, there's the one guy like, this rain's not that bad, it could be worse, and then a couple thunder cracks, and all of a sudden,
Yeah. Nah, there's always a thing in our office too, is when we get to the end of the winter, because the winter is our busiest season. And we get to the end of the winter and be like, oh, we're in the clear now. I'm like, no, whoa, whoa, what are you doing? It is March 1st right now. That is not meaning we're safe by any means from big storms. I mean, well, we had snow on Mother's Day in May a few years ago. So no, I don't usually get comfortable until we get to May, and then I start feeling pretty good about, the where we're covering, and that winter won't affect anything else.
yeah, absolutely.
Um, but how about one last question? What was some of the worst weather that you had to deal with? Whether it was in the infantry or, as a officer on the ground or what?
So the heat in Iraq was insane. We were up in the 120s. I think heat index were in 130s at times. So that was just nuts. And then you're walking every day on just the asphalt through the city at urban environment, clearing houses and stuff. That was pretty brutal. I think probably the worst I had, like for long period of time, was Afghanistan in 2000. This would have been the 2010, or excuse me, 2011-12 winter. I commanded Cop Boris, so I had guys up at Boris, the little outpost that I commanded. I had guys at Cop Zorak and Cop Tillman. Tillman's like where Pat Tillman lost his life. But we're way up in the mountains again, 7,000-8,000 feet. There's really no roads to get to us. The only way to get to us was by air, essentially by helicopter. um, the winter was the worst winter they'd had in like 30 years or something. So we got snowed in. So obviously we stockpiled all of our fuel, oil, stuff like that to run the generators, food, water, you name it. But the winter was so bad they couldn't get up to us for several months with any resupply. So we actually had to start shutting down some of our little rooms where we were sleeping and some of the tentage, and move them and consolidate to save on fuel. Um, Getting down to like one hot meal a day, and then we're eating these like meals ready to eat. And I remember we got down to the fact that actually we had some local nationals, some Afghans that lived on a little outpost with us that worked for me. So with them, we ended up actually, no kidding, setting up little snares and traps, and they had these snow rabbits, these like wild rabbits up there in the mountains. We actually started snaring and killing some of the rabbits and then cooking those for dinner some of the nights, just so we'd have some like hot food. So yeah, it was extremely cold up there, snowed in, and yeah, when the weather kind of finally broke even, they did what's called, I think it's called an LCLA. I forget what it stands for, but it was a special resupply where they had like a C-130 plane filled with like pallets of food and water for us. and they did this like low level flight, like 100 feet over us. And right as they got over like our little base, like right outside, they literally just went straight up, opened the back of the plane, and just all these pallets of stuff just came dumping out. And we had like little ATVs and trucks to go secure them and bring them back in. And so, yeah, that weather was just insane. Like,
So there you go, guys, out there. You get a 2-foot blizzard. It's going to be cleared in a day or two. So relax. You're not Lieutenant Colonel Jenson here. Stuck in the mountains, snowed in, no food, snaring rabbits. You don't got to run and get your milk and eggs all the time, right?
Yeah. I've been cold before, and that was some of the coldest I have ever been.
Well, hey, I think that pretty much wraps it up, Brian. I really do appreciate you being on our podcast and really giving us some insight on how the weather really affects the military.
Yeah, no problem at all, brother. Thank you guys for having me on. This has been awesome and a fun talk and all that. Something I don't really get to talk with anywhere. I don't get to geek out on this stuff outside of work. So
Well, that's good. I mean, but that's what we're trying to do with the podcast. We're trying to bring, all the effects of weather that can happen, just expanding the knowledge on that and how people use it and how they deal with it. So again, thanks a lot for being on the program, and might have to invite you back another time.
anytime, brother. My pleasure. I'd love to do it again.
Okay. All right, everybody. So thank you for joining us today. Thanks for listening. Remember, we'll have a new podcast every 2 weeks here on the Weather Lounge. And also, please rate the podcast. This helps push our show forward. And don't forget to visit WeatherWorks on social media. And as always, find us at weatherworksinc.com. That's all for this episode, and thanks for joining us.